Yeah.
We didn't just start a sport, it was a whole movement.
Metal Mulisha was the brand. If you knew anything about motorcycles, it was Metal Mulisha.
Can you imagine if Metal Mulisha was still on Star?
Gonna be no Metal Mulisha ever again?
What started as a tight-knit crew of outsiders rejected by the corporate world of motocross quickly exploded into one of the most recognizable brands in action sports history. Metal Mulisha wasn't just a freestyle crew, it was a revolution.
Big influence in changing the whole motorcycle culture and way of life.
That Metal Mulisha compasses, he is that guy.
They built a brand on pushing the boundaries. From blacked-out gear, skull logos, and a rebellious attitude, they flipped the industry on its head. They weren't just riding, they were redefining what motocross could be. Metal Mulisha were doing things the industry said couldn't or shouldn't be done. But destruction was built into their DNA. They didn't just take risks on the track, they lived recklessly off of it. The crashes got worse, the parties got wilder, and the crew started to unravel. Some walked away, some spiraled out, and others paid the ultimate price. Their reign didn't just fade, it detonated. Brian Deegan and Larry Linkogle weren't just outsiders in motocross. They were walking middle fingers to everything the industry stood for. In a sport that catered to polished, media-trained racers backed by corporate sponsors, Deegan and Linkogle were the exact opposite. Rough around the edges, tatted up, and unapologetically defiant, they clashed with the buttoned-up, corporate-driven world of professional racing. Deegan had skill, no doubt about it, but he wasn't the kind of rider big teams wanted. His attitude was too wild, too unpredictable. Linkogle, even worse. He wasn't just against the system, he wanted to burn it down. They weren't the golden boys of motocross. They were the rejects, the guys nobody believed in, and the industry made sure they felt it. Then came 1997. Deegan lined up for the 125cc main event in Los Angeles, and when he won, he didn't just celebrate, he made history. Instead of rolling through the finish like a good company man, he ghost rode his bike across the line.
Goes down, the checkered flag, and Deegan lets his bike fly into the air, standing with his arms in the air.
The crowd erupted. The industry was horrified. Deegan didn't care. That moment didn't just get him noticed. It put the whole motocross world on edge. But no matter how much fans loved them, the industry wasn't budging. The big teams weren't interested in rebels. The sponsors didn't want riders they couldn't control. Racing at the highest level was expensive. And without corporate backing, Deegan and Linkogle were stuck in a brutal cycle. Good enough to compete, but never given the chance to truly succeed. The message was clear. If they weren't willing to play the game, they weren't getting a seat at the table. So, they stopped trying. Instead of chasing a dream that didn't want them, they turned to something else. Something raw, untamed, and completely their own. They took their bikes to the hills, launching off cliffs, inventing new tricks, and carving out a space where the industry's rules didn't apply. The same attitude that got them blacklisted in racing was about to make them legends. By the late 90s, Deegan and the riders who would become Metal Mulisha were done with the politics of motocross. They didn't need starting gates, sponsors breathing down their necks, or factory teams calling the shots. All they needed was a dirt bike, a wide-open stretch of land, and a crew just as reckless as they were. While the rest of the motocross world was obsessed with lap times and sponsorship deals, Deegan and his crew were out in the hills, sending massive jumps. It was raw, dangerous, and unpredictable. Nobody knew if they'd land or if they'd be getting carried out in a stretcher. That was the point. Crusty Demons of Dirt started the freestyle movement. This underground video series didn't just capture the riding, it captured the attitude. The footage wasn't polished. It wasn't a highlight reel of podium speeches and factory team press conferences. It was pure anarchy. Guys launching 100-foot jumps with no landing zones, cops showing up to shut down riding spots, and nights that blurred into mornings fueled by adrenaline and alcohol. It was raw, it was real, and it sold millions of copies. By the late 90s, freestyle motocross, FMX, was no longer just a sideshow. It was a movement. Deegan and his crew weren't just making a name for themselves. They were about to change motocross forever. By the early 2000s, freestyle motocross had taken over action sports. What started as a few riders launching off dirt hills for fun had exploded into a global phenomenon, one that was being broadcasted to millions. And right in the middle of the mayhem was Metal Mulisha. They weren't just another group of riders trying to make a name for themselves. They were FMX. At every major competition, Metal Mulisha riders weren't just there to ride, they were there to dominate. X Games, Gravity Games, Red Bull X Fighters. Wherever there was an FMX contest, Metal Mulisha showed up ready to tear the place apart. In 2002, Mike Metzger made history when he landed the first back-to-back backflips at the X Games.
First hit, 45 feet. Second hit, 80 feet. The confidence, the timing.
Sending the crowd into a frenzy and proving that the trick wasn't just possible, it was the future. Meanwhile, guys like Ronnie Feist, Jeremy Twitch Stenberg, and Bo Manley were pushing limits in competitions and free-riding sessions that didn't even make it to TV. But Metal Mulisha's impact wasn't just about what they did, it was how they did it. They were loud, aggressive, and completely unapologetic. If they didn't like a judge's score, they let them know, right to their face. They brought an energy to FMX that had never been seen before. Even outside of competition, the militia kept their name in the headlines. They weren't just riding, they were throwing parties that would put rock stars to shame. If there was a Metal Mulisha event, you could bet there would be fights, arrests, and enough chaos to make mainstream media lose their minds. And that's exactly what made them legends. Metal Mulisha was untouchable until it wasn't. The same reckless energy that fueled its rise was the same force that sent it spiraling. The brutal nature of freestyle motocross, the all-or-nothing lifestyle, and the chaos within the crew all played a role in its collapse. FMX wasn't just about progression, it was survival. Every year, jumps got bigger, tricks got riskier, and the margin for error shrank. Pushing limits wasn't just about winning anymore, it was about staying alive. Larry Linkogle, one of the original minds behind the Metal Mulisha, nearly paid the ultimate price. In 2001, a crash left him in a coma. He survived, but the scars, mental and physical, never fully faded. Then came the losses that shook the sport. Jeremy Lusk's tragic accident in 2009 was a sobering reminder that FMX was playing with fire. Riders weren't just breaking bones, they were putting their lives on the line every time they threw a leg over the bike. The injuries stacked up. Even the toughest riders had limits. The ones who weren't sidelined by broken bodies were watching their friends drop out one by one. Some could still ride, but the price of staying in the game was getting too high. The core group that built Metal Mulisha was starting to fade. With success came money, and with money came excess. Metal Mulisha had built its reputation on being the wildest, rowdiest crew in action sports. But what started as post-contest celebrations turned into full-blown mayhem. After parties blurred into the next morning, fights broke out at events, and the off-track chaos started catching up with them. For some, painkillers weren't just for injuries anymore.
You know, I went home, I got weeded that night. 2 days later, my best friend OD'd in my truck, and my addiction was so bad that, you know, I took his pills after he died.
It was that bad?
It was that bad, and it was, you know, it's sad to say, my life was that bad. It was
Wrecking, rehabbing, and riding again became a cycle that was hard to escape. A few riders went down the rabbit hole, numbing the pain of their battered bodies and the pressure of staying relevant. The same fearlessness that made them legends on the bike made them reckless off of it. Some cleaned up and walked away. Others weren't so lucky. The destruction was no longer just happening on the track. It was happening behind closed doors. Metal Mulisha wasn't built for corporate boardrooms. It was built in the dirt, by riders who lived and breathed rebellion. But as the brand grew, so did the tensions. What started as a tight-knit brotherhood began to fracture under the weight of money, sponsorships, and conflicting visions.
For Mulisha, 2010. I think like the end of 2010.
Was that just a personal decision?
No, it was a fuck you decision. Like I was working on a TV show and Brian wasn't stoked on it.
I remember that.
Yeah, ended up trying to take it from me. And then I was just kind of like, you're supposed to be my friend. Like, why the fuck would you go behind my back and try to take this from me? You know?
Brian Deegan saw an opportunity to take Metal Mulisha to the next level. Bigger deals, mainstream exposure, and expansion beyond just freestyle motocross. But not everyone was on board. Larry Linkogle, one of the brand's original driving forces, wanted to keep it raw and underground. To him, the Mulisha wasn't just a company, it was a way of life that wasn't meant to be packaged for the masses. The power struggle was unavoidable. Linkogle's departure marked one of the first major cracks in the foundation. Others followed, either walking away or getting pushed out. What had once been a group of like-minded misfits riding for the love of it had turned into something different. The industry had forced them to choose, evolve, or hold their ground. And not everyone agreed on the answer. The same energy that made them unstoppable was now tearing them apart. The infighting wasn't just costing friendships, it was costing Metal Mulisha its identity. As the crew fractured, the brand started to drift from what made it special. The rebellion was losing its fire. and fans could feel it. Metal Mulisha wasn't just a name, it was a movement, a brand built on adrenaline, defiance, and a complete disregard for authority. It was the uniform of rebellion, the go-to symbol for anyone who lived fast and didn't care who was watching. But chaos doesn't stay chaos forever, and when Metal Mulisha got too big, the rebellion started to fade. At its peak, Metal Mulisha was everywhere. It wasn't just in the motocross pits or at FMX contests. It was in mall stores, department chains, and slapped on the backs of kids who had never even seen a dirt bike in real life. The same brand that once represented anti-establishment chaos had become a mainstream commodity. It had gone from outlaw to oversized retail display. The fans saw it happening. They weren't just supporting a brand, they were part of something bigger. But the moment that identity became mass-produced, something changed. What was once a symbol of defiance started feeling like just another corporate logo. Freestyle motocross was built on pushing limits, breaking rules, and doing the impossible. In the late 90s and early 2000s, that meant launching off cliffs, landing never-before-seen tricks, and riding with a who-cares-if-we-die mentality. That was the Metal Mulisha way. But by the mid-2000s teens, FMX had changed. Tricks got more technical. Contests became more structured. Sponsors wanted clean-cut, polished athletes who fit the new corporate-friendly image of the sport. The outlaw mentality that Metal Mulisha thrived on, it didn't fit anymore. Suddenly, new FMX stars weren't repping Metal Mulisha gear. The younger generation wasn't connecting with the brand like their predecessors had. The sport cleaned up, but Metal Mulisha didn't. What had once been the face of freestyle motocross now felt like a relic of a wilder time. And when the next wave of athletes and fans came up, Metal Mulisha wasn't part of their world anymore. The rebellion had turned into a business, and businesses don't stay on top forever. Metal Mulisha was never just a clothing brand. It was an attitude, an identity, a movement. But rebellion isn't something you can package and sell forever. The moment the movement became a corporation, the foundation started to crack. The brand didn't disappear overnight, but the writing was on the wall. Freestyle moved on. The industry changed. The fans who once lived and breathed Metal Mulisha grew up, found new idols, or left the sport entirely. But Metal Mulisha did something few brands could ever claim. It burned fast, burned bright, and left a mark that can't be erased. Stick around for another video of those who changed the game and refused to be forgotten. It took a group of dirt bike outlaws and turned them into legends. It changed freestyle motocross forever. The question now isn't where Metal Mulisha has been, it's whether the world is still wild enough for it to rise again. Thanks for watching, and let us know down in the comments if you used to be or still are a fan of Metal Mulisha. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell.